All right, we are live. Let's get it, Peter.
What's up, Rebel fam? It's nice to be back with you this week. We got a really dope episode for you this week. And you know what we always do? We always hit you with that real talk, and we always hit you with some dope people. So today, we're getting into it on a really interesting topic. But before we get into all that, I want you guys to smash the like button, follow us on social media, and also hit that subscribe button on YouTube. You know you want to, just do it. But let's check in with our wonderful co-host, Jacoby. How you doing?
My guy, Peter. It's a beautiful day. Shout out to that weekend we had in Central Park.
We're everywhere. We were uptown, downtown, Brooklyn. Yeah. I don't know how you got me out there, but yeah, we had a great week last week. Lulu, how you doing?
I'm on week 7 of a 2-month road trip. So I'm in LA right now at the home of actually one of our July guests. And really excited today to feature one of my best friends, colleagues, and amazing technologist and strategist, Kelani Nichole. Hey, Kelani.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me.
And before we start talking about all of her expertise in the blockchain, NFTs, crypto space, Peter, why don't you tell us what's happening in the world in cannabis?
Well, as you guys know, tons of stuff going on all around the world. But of course, we got to hit you with what's happening in our backyard, and that is Connecticut has officially legalized adult use marijuana. Dun, dun, dun. So hitting you with the things you want to know most, of course, the social equity provisions. And Connecticut kind of followed suit with New York in that they're allocating 50% of all licensees to social equity applicants. It's a little conflicting, and I wasn't able to determine exactly what they're considering social equity applicants, but it seems to me, and please correct me, those of you in our audience who know more, that they're just going to give it to jurisdictions like cities and municipalities that they deemed, through the research and data, those communities that were harmed the most by the war on drugs. So areas that have high prosecution rates, et cetera, they're going to allow people from those areas to claim social equity status. So it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be a really interesting market. But some of the other aspects of their market that differentiate from others, they're going to have way less taxes than New York. They're estimating around 4% less taxes. So is it going to be enough to get people to go from New York to Connecticut to buy their weed? Who knows? But the future will only tell. They are going to erase prior convictions, but in a very strange way that I wasn't able to find a justification for. They're only doing automatic expungements for those who were convicted between January 1st of 2000 and October 1st of 2015. Those who are not within that period will have to petition separately. So not sure why that 15-year period, but I mean, automatic expungement is good no matter what. But I mean, for the people who got arrested last year, and yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with that. They also, in terms of being anti or pro competition, they're only allowing applicants to have one type of license each. And so that's to prevent people from monopolizing verticals and such. And to what our audience probably cares most about, possession of up to 2 ounces in public will go into effect next month. And then you can have up to 8 in your household. So very quick overview of Connecticut legalization. What do you guys think?
Peter, did you say you can have up to 2 ounces with you in public?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And they have, Connecticut was strange in that they have a lot more dialogue, I guess, on the public health aspects and the fines and penalties for those who are underaged. It's pretty complicated, but I encourage all the young people in Connecticut to definitely get familiar with those laws. It's like first offense, you only get a fine, and then the second offense, it's like a $500 fine, and then it turns into a Class D misdemeanor. So it's still not, you're not in the clear, depending on your age and stuff.
Is there a cap on licenses?
And I didn't read anything on any caps on licenses.
Yeah, I mean, there's like what, 3 million people in Connecticut, but there's so many people around. So the low taxes is interesting because some people will come through, of course, but people that are trying to get weed are probably already getting it, and that's a short-lived kind of like advantage, right? We see all these other states on the horizon. I do like that they are doing, I don't know what it's called, but it's not vertically integrated, like horizontal integration.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to call it. Anti-competitive or pro-competitive.
Definitely competitive, but I feel you. I like that. It gives advantages to smaller businesses to really, have like a foothold. That's weird though on the timeline for expungement.
Yeah.
I'm curious what their logic was for the max and min there.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Next time, if you guys hit us in the comments, you guys want to know more, or you guys have some insight of your own, please comment or hit us up in the DMs. We're always willing to hop on a call and talk more about it. So moving on, a new study coming out of Australia found that stone driving and the impairment it has on, or the outcomes that it has on driving crashes and other types of mishaps on the road is significantly less than that of prescription drugs like opioids, antidepressants, and benzodiazepines. So in another blow to what a lot of anti-legalization groups quote or try to cite as a huge trouble to society in legalizing cannabis, Australia has proven otherwise. And they were able to do this by retroactively studying their medical marijuana patients.
Did they study relative to completely sober drivers?
Yeah, everything was relatively completely sober.
So how'd they do compared to sober drivers?
I mean, not as good as sober drivers. Yeah, obviously, sober is the best. But they equated it to a blood alcohol level of 0.03, which you're legally allowed to have up to 0.07. And then the thing is, like, they incorporated prescription drugs, which traditionally you don't really see in a lot of like these American studies. They're only looking like sober versus inebriated. And so you've never heard anybody say anything about, oh, that person was on opioids, that's why they crashed, or oh, that person had just had surgery a month ago and was on oxy. Like, you never hear about prescription drugs in this area of study or in this conversation. And so they really brought in a good set of data to combat a lot of narratives about impaired driving.
Did they though? Like the reason people have a problem with stone driving is because you're impaired, and it shows that you're impaired.
Yeah.
Now, it's much less than alcohol. I bet alcohol is like exponentially worse.
Well, equal to 0.03 alcohol.
But it gives them something to like root it into instead of just straight BS. You ever hear that like a drunk driver runs a red light, a stone driver, or no, wait, hold on, I messed it up. A drunk driver runs a stop sign, a stone driver waits for it to turn green.
Yeah.
So which one would you prefer?
I've been there and I've seen that, so I would concur with that one. But I'm in New York. I don't drive anymore.
Fair enough. All right, what else?
Finally, we have a story that kind of ties into our topic of conversation today, and that is the final conviction of, I don't know how to say his name, sorry, the CFO at Eaze, who was convicted to 2.5 years in prison for money laundering scheme of $150 million, through which he, like back in the day, as Lulu can get into more, Eaze was the first on the scene to be able to process credit card payments, and they took a huge market share when they were able to do that, because then you could just open up an app and order your weed through there, and then they would deliver it to you. But it turns out that in those days they were doing that illegally through a complex scheme of bank fraud, in which they set up shell companies to accept transactions, and then they were processing those transactions under false codes, because every transaction gets a specific code, whether it's like food or etc. So it was a pretty convoluted, and they worked with a payment processor out of Germany. It's a crazy story. I highly recommend you guys to look into it. But yeah, he's finally convicted, and hopefully we'll hear from Kelani on the prospects of crypto and being able to wash money or other forms. But
Well, the thing is, they weren't like money laundering for like what I'll say like personal gain, right? Like they're using the company to like wash some money and put it in their pocket. They were just trying to operate their business without any access to proper banking. It's very illegal, so that really sucks. But it's just another reason why the fact that these companies don't have banking, it shows the demand in the market to do these transactions, and there's no way to do it. I remember early Colorado, there's plenty of times I didn't go to the dispensary just because I didn't have cash. Right?
I just think it's interesting that it was a German bank that facilitated this. You know, I could see like maybe a Cayman bank or something, but Germany is pretty tight with a lot of their things normally. Maybe I'm making a generalization, but yeah, I was surprised that the German bank went down as well with it.
Yeah.
Humans?
It's a payment processor, not a bank necessarily, but yeah. But yeah, the Wall Street Journal article is probably the best place you're going to get a comprehensive breakdown of the story.
Lulu, did you have some insight into how that whole thing went down?
I think it was that everyone knew what was happening. Everyone in the industry knew what was happening, but no one said anything because it was a large entity, and you know, everybody was able to get paid, right? And there was a lot of gray area and a lot of people taking these risks. Unfortunately, it was revealed by another group, and that's how it started moving forward. All of a sudden, there was a clutching the pearls, and oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, even though it was happening for quite a long time. And that's the part of this kind of nascent industry. There's a lot of people who take risks because things aren't clearly defined, and there's repercussions for that. So I think it all depends on your risk level and what you want to try to move forward. So just always have good lawyers, always have a good network of people, and gauge your risk level when you want to play in the cannabis space.
Amen.
All right, cool. Well, thank you, Peter. Time to start our next section. Very excited about this. It does tie into banking and finance and about 100 other applications. We're talking about blockchain. It's a little bit of a twist from us, from our typical conversation. We normally talk about how you can make money in the weed game. And I think what's really cool here is we're bringing somebody that has a vast experience in a parallel industry, I'll call it, in blockchain, and also like a super homie of Lulu. So we're always excited to have a super homie of Lulu. And Kelani's just really dope. So Kelani, how you doing today? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Excited to talk about art and blockchain and how it might apply to the industry.
Yeah, most def. So let's just get it started. You're kind of like an art curator mixed with a technologist, an entrepreneur, and like I can't even begin to try to put you in a bucket. So, and I'm probably like missing other things. before you even tell me exactly what it is you do and your companies, how did you fall into this like semi niche realm of like the digital art space?
Yeah, I was working in tech after studying art history in undergrad. Had kind of, put aside that passion and gone to business time and was developing my career, and then had an opportunity to start curating through an experimental collective. And it just made sense to look at what people were doing online and with interactive technologies, because I spent so much of my life in the internet and connected in network culture. So it all sort of fell organically out of those two worlds colliding very early on.
All right, cool. So talk to me about, I want to just break down a couple of your companies that you've started in that journey. So in 2013, you started Transfer Gallery. Can you talk to me about how that came to life?
Yeah, totally. So Transfer was really just an experiment. It grew out of my experience in Philadelphia with a collective called Little Berlin, which was the experimental curatorial group. And I had produced a few shows there and had moved to New York and thought, why not just try it out? I found a really cool warehouse space in Brooklyn, in the East Williamsburg neighborhood, and started to transform it into a white cube, and did some experimental exhibitions with artists who I had been working with in the old space, but focused one-on-one with solo shows, and really thinking about the gallery as more than a white cube, as kind of a blank canvas for an artist working with interactive technologies and showing things mostly online and on screens. How can we bring that into the space in a new way that's more immersive and engaging, and kind of de-screen the computer-based artwork and create more of an encounter and an experience around it, a social space around it, a space for dialogue with curators and writers. So that was sort of the origin of Transfer, and have been doing it for 8 years. It's evolved in many different forms. But I think that it continues to support artists who are, really prescient and thinking about tech and sort of showing us where we're headed.
And what do you think like the adoption of like artists that you see in the digital space is it tend to be what I'm going to say naively, like traditional artists that like transfer to tech? Or are they like techie people that stay there and just find art in, like, do they transfer into this digital realm, or are they like digitally native?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate it in the context of like NFTs and the conversation we're having today too, because a lot of people think that digital art is something new, but in fact it's not. It's been around for decades and generations, and there have been artists working with technology since television to really think about new ways of reaching public audiences and inverting the power structures in the art world. So I see the work at Transfer as kind of in that lineage. And to answer your question pretty directly, yeah, I work with artists who are native to digital technology, specifically networked technologies. So artists who are engaging in the public web and the public space of the web. It's almost in some ways more like street art than contemporary art, because it exists in this open and accessible and distributed way. But there certainly are, at this point in the game, a ton of established artists who work in traditional media who are now on a hype cycle trying to jump into technology and make work. And you can very much see the difference between the artists who are engaging with the affordances at a really deep level and a deep conceptual level versus the artists who work with traditional materials and might be dabbling with translating their work into media-based.
I just like, I can't quite fathom how these artists kind of like are in this network, this digital network, and like, how does one kind of like find their, I know that in art, everybody's journey is going to be different, but right. Like how did people like find their calling into this realm?
I think everyone has a different story, and that's kind of what fascinates me so much about working with artists. It's like, these people who are trying to show you something about the human condition or their view of the world or what's to come. Specifically, I work with a lot of artists who are thinking about the future and sort of refiguring some of the power structures in place now and presenting alternative futures. So that's sort of a focus in the work. But yeah, a lot of the artists like myself will straddle the commercial world and the contemporary art world. So a lot of them are coders or they're designers, or, they have a practice where the skills that they make their studio work with also can make them money. But yeah, everyone's path is so unique. I don't know if I could categorize it more than that. Many educators too, people who find space within the context of the university to do research and development. That's a lot of the artists that I work with as well, because it really does take a different access to technology and resources than a more traditional medium.
What I've caught on to already is a phrase you've used a couple times of like rethinking like the power structures of like our future world. And I feel like the art world is maybe an exasperated, like traditional art is like an exasperated version of like what our actual society looks like, or maybe not exasperated, like it's actually it's a great example, microcosm of what our world actually looks like, where you have these rich elites that kind of like make the decisions and have majority, if not all of the power. And through this kind of like network of digital artists, you can kind of like bypass a little bit of that. How is that reimagining and how is it creating new opportunities to like rethink those structures?
Yeah, and I think that's like a perfect segue into talking about, this transition moment we're in right now, where the internet is really moving from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. And that move itself, it's something we're sort of in the early stages of it right now. We're starting to see it. The place where we see it the most is in crypto, in the space of decentralized finance. It's sort of the most sophisticated market. But this whole movement is about decentralization of power. It's about moving away from corporate-owned webs, the Facebooks, the Googles, surveillance capitalism, the advertising model, and moving to a new model of decentralized economies, data ownership, trust that functions in a different way, which is all tied to transparency, which gets us to the backbone, which is the blockchain. But I think that what's really interesting that we're seeing in this moment with NFTs, and I know we're gonna kind of talk about that a little bit later on, is that the art world is typically the last industry to be disrupted. And I know this as a technologist working within contemporary art because it's sort of fetishized. We go through these different hype cycles of, oh my God, VR in the art world, AR, and then it was like AI. What about artificial intelligence in art, and GANs, and you saw that going to auction. And so we've been a part of these conversations over and over again. But what's happening in this moment is, aside from finance, the art world is the very first industry to be disrupted by decentralized economies, by this massive shift from Web 2 to Web 3. And it's arrived in the form of the NFT. So I think that this moment is when we can really put new propositions into this system and structure new values in, but it's not necessarily what we're seeing play out quite yet.
Yeah. And I have a ton of questions going down that realm. I'm going to hold off on a second because I didn't give you enough props on all the other things that you do or have done. So before we get into that whole realm of kind of like Web 3.0, can you just talk to me quickly about like the current museum and then also your video lounges? Because I think both of those are really cool and I don't want to skip over that.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, in a similar way, we, and when I say we, I mean myself and a group of people, Lulu was one of our earliest members, formed something called the Current Museum, which was about how you could collect and steward time-based media work in a new way. So it was a museum without walls. Instead of going to the museum comes to you. And we did salons in homes. And then the works were accessible from our members' homes. You could enjoy the museum's collection in your own home. And it was very much about bringing people together and having conversations about new sets of values. The museum was really founded on decentralized principles, even though this wasn't a technology experiment, it was a human experiment. And it was all about the gatherings and, you know, the knowledge exchange and the discourse we were having at the salons, educating people about contemporary art and how to live with it. And
It was,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to jump in. It was very similar to kind of our vibe with Revel, which is being very inclusive and being very engaged. So my first salon, I was just like, what the heck is this? You arrived, there was, I think, a curator that selected the pieces, and then you got to interact with all of the pieces. And then you were given this budget that you could actually select the pieces that you wanted. So you were participating as a collector, as a member, which I thought was really amazing. And then based on that voting, determined what pieces would be part of the permanent collection of this museum, which was just amazing to feel kind of that my voice counted. And that I also had access to these amazing pieces of art that could live on a wall, that could live on my phone, that could live anywhere that it could be plugged into. So, yeah. Thank you so much for that experience.
I'm so glad you loved it, babe. Thank you for being a part of it. It was really special to have you. And yeah, I think that like that idea, again, Jacoby, to like what we were talking about before of inverting power structures, you know, it's not just a few wealthy individuals who go behind closed doors to decide our cultural heritage. It's a larger, different, you know, a group of people who have different perspectives on what's important about our cultural moment and what should be preserved. And so we hope that the collection would be a reflection of that group of folks, and that it could even grow organically, not in a centralized way where we would be one museum holding everything, but in a way where different communities could have ownership of their own collections, could invite curators more to their taste or their region, and have it really be less extractive and more, you know, dwelling and remaining in the context from which these works came from. So those were just some big ideas that the institution was experimenting with. And yeah, video lounges in the same way. It's you know, it happened during the pandemic. It's just a little bootstrapped special place we made online, and it's face-to-face communication like we're kind of doing here via video. But again, it puts humans kind of before technology. So we model what happens in a party. So you come into a room full of people, you can see who's in a conversation with who, how long they've been talking. You can jump in and out of conversations. I built a feature for, you know, the introverts. It's the lurker feature. You can just listen in on a conversation so you don't appear in video. You don't kind of interrupt the flow, just like we do in a real party, you know, kind of go around the room, work the room. You can have private conversations and everyone can kind of see, oh, these two people are in a private conversation that no one else can join for how long, just like kind of these dynamics. So that's an open space that we make available for discussions about art and technology, different kinds of groups to gather. It's totally non-corporate. We don't invite corporations to participate in this place. We want it to be about empowering community organizers. And yeah, you know, as it grows, we're thinking about, again, new ways to distribute wealth, and how can the organizers, the people doing the human capital, how can they become stakeholders in a product like that in a way that isn't maybe venture capital driven, but is more about community ownership? And, you know, something like the blockchain might be able to help us power a system like that for redistribution of wealth and acknowledgement of all the labor that goes into these kinds of virtual experiences we have together.
And I'm going to say that how you met your partner who built it is pretty amazing. Please talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, he's a stranger that I met online, and we're on a listserv together. And, you know, he threw out a little idea, and I reached out to him to riff off and try and see if he wanted to do something different. And we just really both wanted to bring people together. So as strangers, we worked remotely during lockdown. And then we actually just met on my last trip to New York in Prospect Park in person, which was pretty cool. But, you know, the way the whole product developed was really with the community. And I was, you know, I'm single. So during the pandemic, I was thinking about new ways to bring people together. And we held these isolation cocktails as sort of like private beta tests where we could test out the dynamics of people coming together and having fluid conversations and the serendipity of meeting someone new, that you didn't know before, that we can't really do in Zoom, trapped in boxes and breakout rooms necessarily.
Yeah, I'm over breakout rooms. When I think about the kind of like the party atmosphere you created digitally, I can't help but think that like my secret introvertedness would like be very apparent. Whereas a lot of the Rebel family knows like I'm out talking a lot and being super social, but Lulu and Peter know that as soon as that's over, I just like decompress into like this tiny little bubble and like I don't want to talk to anybody. And so I think if I was in that digital atmosphere, you'd actually see a more genuine me. I'd be like tired of talking after a while.
I'm going to rename you the lurker, Jacoby.
Please don't do that. That'll make me meet less people. All right. So excited about all the dope things that you're creating. But I want to, like a lot of our audience here are cannabis people, right? They're either activists, they're advocates, they're entrepreneurs looking for a new career or whatever. So we're going to take it to cannabis eventually. Bear with me, guys. But before we even get there, like we kind of have to understand a little bit about like the basics of this new generation of technology. So I'm going to ask you for like a couple 101 definitions, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So first of all, what in the world is Web 3.0?
So Web 3.0 is the internet with trust. And when we talk about a trustless web, it's a web where everything is transparent. So the way I know you're going to do something is because I can see what you do, right? So there's no need for us to have trust or in a third party or centralized way because everything is accessible and transparent. So it unlocks all of these potentials for new peer-to-peer transactions and new communities to form values together in different ways. And it's a fundamental shift in the way we move through digital spaces now. When I, go online, who I am online is, my Instagram profile, my LinkedIn profile, my website, my, all of my social media entities, and I have to go in there, fill in and fit in their boxes, give them my data, and I am then monetized within their system. That's Web 2.0. That's the old system. In the new system, we own our identity. So there's something called a decentralized identification document. It's still somewhat conceptual. There are a number of them that are like up and running and people experimenting with them and building standards around them. But the idea is in the trustless web, we all control our own identity. We give consent to companies if we want to communicate with them or if we want to find value in that exchange. We then can do that with each other and with groups of folks in any fashion that we can imagine and form governance rules around that map to the world. We can also build into that technology.
So I'm trying to balance these two things. There's on one level in Web 3.0, you can actually be in control of your own data. You are able to like choose what you want to give and what you want to get in a very basic understanding. However, on the other hand, the way this happens is transparency. So like I have to show the whole world everything that I'm doing in order to retake my privacy.
It's when you say transparency, you can define that in different ways. So we would set values around that, what you want to see and what you don't want to see. And essentially everything is recorded publicly. There's evidence of it. And there are different levels of access within that and all sorts of different possibilities within that system. So don't confuse transparency at the top level with, everything being completely exposed.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Number 2 definition. Explain blockchain in 45 seconds or less. There's your challenge.
It's a distributed public ledger, so it's just an online spreadsheet that everyone can read and see. Totally public. That's it. It's database. It's super nerdy. That's all it is.
And what is the value of that? Actually, sorry, that's such a loaded question.
So much, yeah.
What is so game changing about that?
Well, it's the fact of it's an immutable public ledger. So it's about cryptography and it being verifiable and immutable. And that's a very special innovation that Satoshi brought into the world. Thank you, Satoshi.
The legend, the one and only. All right. Now, I have like 2 more definitions for you, and then we'll really get into it. Explain what exactly cryptocurrency is.
So what I was kind of explaining before, where we control our identity, the only way that that happens right now in the system in a large scale way is with a wallet. So everything's kind of framed as, you know, a monetizable asset because we are all wallets right now. Like that's my, you know, if you know how your wallet works, that's exactly, you know, how this new set of authentication will work. So yeah, it's a hash address. There's a public key and a private key, and it can be completely anonymous. That's part of the beauty of transparency and this kind of trustless system. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry if I got on a little tangent. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Oh, what is crypto? Whew. I think it's money that comes from air. I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, way to make them feel more secure with that last one. No, I love it. All right, I'm going to give you one more test. Actually, I have 2 more. I'm sorry, I lied. The 45-second version of what is an NFT?
Yeah, an NFT is a receipt. So it is a receipt that is inscribed in the immutable public ledger, which is the blockchain, right? And specifically an NFT, a traditional NFT, is an Ethereum ERC 721 smart contract. In other words, it's a bit of executable code. That's what an NFT is. And it generates and inscribes a receipt into this immutable ledger. And that receipt can post to anything.
I remember when you were talking about, I remember when Kelani was actually talking about NFTs entering the art world, and that was like around 2016, I think. So jump to 5 years later, and I think you're way ahead of your time, Kelani.
I would say it differently, that she was built for this time in the world. Like being such a tech native and art forward, like this was like Kelani's moment. Right, like that's why it's so exciting. We went to like an AR event of Kelani's in New York before I even really knew what was going on.
Oh yeah, the rooftop that you hosted, Kelani.
Yeah. So yeah, this is her moment. This is her moment. All right, I got one more definition for you. Okay, we haven't brought it up yet, but what is a DAO?
Oh, cool. Yeah. A DAO, that's DAO. It stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And it is, I would say, an abstraction from crypto, but the same concept. It's a way for groups to come together with governance rules and establish value, establish liquidity, build wealth together. And yeah, maintain new types of economies and engagements, and all sorts of other things. And the sort of future of DAOs is really what's going to change all sorts of industries. Again, the art world was really the first, but just like we saw in Web 2.0, you know, transportation, hospitality, every industry completely changed by Web 2.0. We're about to enter into another cycle of that. But in a way that moves away from these centralized megacorps back into communities of decentralized networks. And the DAO is the sort of representation of how that happens in this way.
Okay, so what I really like about this whole conversation is the fact that it's an inevitability that Web 3.0 will have a drastic change on the cannabis industry. And the reason we thought you would be especially interesting to talk to is because, like you said, you're in the art world, which is like kind of an early adopter in a rare occasion here. And we can kind of start to make some guesses of how this might affect the cannabis industry at large. So before we get into this, Peter is the biggest nerd I know, so he needs to join the conversation now because I know he's got tons of questions. So that's my shout out to Peter. Get in here. Now let's talk about the cannabis industry at large. Now there's a ton of different applications for blockchain, cryptocurrencies. I know you've done a little bit of research here, and Peter, you can help us out here. What are the current applications that people are trying to use these technologies for as it exists today? All right, Peter, I'm gonna call on you here because I know we have a couple coins, and I want to kind of like understand how those work in the cannabis industry. So we have things like cannabis coin, dope coin, pot coin. Like, what are these ventures trying to accomplish with this technology? They're all a little bit different, but they're kind of similar.
So there's a lot of different ways that blockchain can impact the cannabis industry. Specific to your question on these pot coin, dope coins, what they were trying to do was what Eaze's CFO was trying to do, and that is develop an economy or a way by which a certain group of people can transact and determine the value of the goods that they care about and want to trade into a monetary coin, token, whatever you want to call it, system that which they could exchange in a way that wasn't regulated by a centralized agency, allowing them to not have to go through banks in order to transact the goods that they wanted for the value that they wanted. So what happened with so that takes a lot of hard work. And so in any crypto token community, you need adoption, you need participants in that economy. So you can think of each of these tokens as an economy. And so right now we're talking about the cannabis economy. We're talking about all the people and businesses that support the production of cannabis and the consumption of cannabis, and getting that to people who then transact their US dollars for those services and products, right? And so with going back to this canna coin, dope coin, pot coin, what they were trying to do is play to the community and build a community of growers and clients and customers that would utilize this coin to transact the value for cannabis. And for those projects, a lot of them didn't really go anywhere. They all had peaks and flows. Everyone knows about the infamous volatility of any crypto. But overall, their problem was they didn't really have an adoption or a community that stuck in it. They had a lot of people who, like any other economy of crypto, kind of like a Ponzi scheme, in that you can have somebody dump a lot of money into it. That'll get a lot of people excited about it. As those people come in, it increases the value of the coin, and then you can liquidate or sell off your stake or however much your position was, now that it's at a higher value. So,
all right. Thank you.
That's a lot. Yeah.
We have a handful of coins that are probably the most popular and by name that were essentially used as a kind of like insular currency.
Yeah.
Right. To like give consumers and companies a way to exchange value within their kind of like defined crypto world. Right. And it didn't, if I'm hearing it right, it didn't work. It hasn't worked too well, mostly because of user adoption. Right. And like, that's why Bitcoin, say what you will, but like it has the greatest adoption, right? At the end of the day.
It's been around for a while.
Yeah. So now let's think about like the other applications of potential blockchain technology. So that's purely on the financing piece, and actually there's probably other finance moves you can do. Kelani, what are some other use cases of this technology in a way that you think it might show itself or it could in the cannabis realm?
Yeah, well, Peter and I were talking about Friends with Benefits, which is the social token turned DAO. Since we've already introduced that term, we kind of know what we're talking about there. And, this is a group of individuals who is, building equity together and forming value around their own sort of social network and, their different knowledge exchanges. And it's really an interesting experiment. Seems like there are a lot of similar kind of groups and movements, even Revel itself, that kind of operate with these kind of governance rules and structures already in place, doing good work in the world. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for those kinds of social capital to, turn into wealth and into communities building wealth together. And aside from that, I feel like cannabis industry in general is very sort of reputation driven, and you can, maybe look to the music industry and what a lot of artists in that industry are doing to look at different forms of, licensing and distributing their work. Some folks I've heard of are doing like album distribution, where the first few folks to purchase the album become equity holders. And then as more people purchase the album, they also make money. So these are, performers and musicians who are making their fans wealthy. They're building wealth for their fans. And so, I wonder if there's ways for brands to build that kind of like value or equity for, new releases, new strains, new products, new applications, thinking really about, where the value in those relationships are and how the technology can help support those values instead of the other way around.
So go for it.
I was going to say, I like that idea, those ideas that you come up with, because one of the reasons we wanted to do this series is, we've seen so many decks with blockchain for cannabis or crypto for cannabis. And, you as an expert in utilization of those platforms in the art industry, we wanted to have you talk about that, because you can tell us like, hey, is there a cryptocurrency for the art world? I don't know. And if so, is it being adopted? And we can apply some of those things towards the cannabis space, right? We've heard supply chain tracking for seed to sale as something for blockchain. And I think one of the biggest questions that you and I always talk about, Kelani, is we already have databases that function correctly enough for this. When do we apply these things, these new technologies? Is it just to apply it for bragging rights of technology's sake? We're trying to have an industry adopt something similar where we can't even have consistency or standards yet. So like, are we putting the cart before the horse just for shits and giggles?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I think it's interesting for folks like y'all, like Revel, who are already, doing things in the world with real people. Like, how can you model some of these decentralized principles? Like, how could you scale what you're doing, or how could it go to other markets or other places? And how could the technology enable that? But modeled really on the first principles of what you're already demonstrating, what you've already done.
Well, yeah. What I noticed when you speak about using this tech, Kelani, is similar to like early stage iPhone apps, right? Like in the first year or two, you could say, oh, we have an app, and people are instantly interested just because like, oh, it's an app, like I just got an iPhone, I just want to play with whatever. But pretty soon it becomes like, I don't care that you have an app, like what does it do for me? How does it solve a problem? And I think that's what Lulu was getting to, that like, yes, you can have the technology exists now for you to create this thing, but is it actually making my life as a user or a consumer better for it? So same with like Friends with Benefits, right? Like you can actually create a community that is better for the technology, but it's not necessarily technology for technology's sake. There's like a new benefit that people are getting from it.
Yeah, and that just runs on a Discord. So, it's not about tech, it's about the humans that are in it and what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in on some of these other use cases for blockchain and cannabis specifically, and just to bring it to Lulu's point on the supply chain. I think having an immutable ledger that is not controlled by one central entity is the promise of of blockchain for supply chain management, in that I could be a grower and then I have my seed with a specific NFT attached to it, and then it gets incorporated into another NFT, and then I can track from that seed all the way to the cart where it was grown, what the testing results are, where it was distributed from. All that kind of information can be attached to a QR code or some other code on that specific project, and it would be not governed by a single entity. It would be a decentralized blockchain, in that each of these corporations would submit or add data onto that specific seed or product in a way that they didn't have to deal with other people or sign up and such. But in terms of like just doing business, there are other applications. So the biggest thing that a lot of people miss when it comes to talking about Ethereum and some of these other more complicated cryptos than Bitcoin, in that there's this invention of smart contracts. So if I was a grower and I wanted to buy X amount of pounds from, or if I wanted to sell X amount of pounds to a dispensary, I could put that money in escrow. Well, I could tell that retailer to put that money in escrow, and then as soon as they received, and then we can form a smart contract, and then I could deliver the weed, and then I knew as soon as I delivered it, I would get my money, and it would execute on the blockchain in this supply chain managed blockchain world. So that's what it opens it up to. It opens up to executable business deals that would be self-governed and will go off without having to worry if XYZ person signed the paper when they got there. So and that's really important because a lot of people in cannabis, as we talked about, compliance is huge. And so if you could outsource all of your compliance, all of your like just having to worry about people doing the right paperwork to the blockchain, that's what we're talking about. That's the innovation, that's the scope. And then there's another really cool idea that's thrown around there that I want to talk about. But
hold on, Peter. Let's get the feedback from Kelani on that though, because
yeah, that's spot on. That's the trust. That's the perfect articulation of how the trust would function within the industry. And you could imagine those two individuals that Peter was talking about, like, could be completely anonymous and they wouldn't even necessarily know each other, but there would be 100% trust that would execute to every party's benefit.
All right, Peter. Let's hear number 3. I got one in the chamber too.
Okay. So the other one is, as a scientist, it's cool in that you could, so right now the holy grail of cannabis science right now is having a strain for an ailment, and then being able to tie that to a specific person, right? So if the only way you're going to do that is if you have a massive database, or if you're doing these clinical trials where you're controlling everything. And so one requires a lot of startup costs. One doesn't require that much startup costs. It just requires the adoption piece that we're talking about. And so you can imagine if I set up a decentralized ledger in which people, every time they contributed a survey on their use with a specific strain and how it helped them, like that's the data that they would submit, I reward them with a Revel coin. Now, because we have a community of retailers and other service providers, they can then use that Revel coin to book a meeting and a consultation with Kelani on a dope cultural art project that they're using to promote their brand. So that's just an example. And yeah, I'll just leave it there.
So it's essentially a world in which you can exchange your, I'll say, your acts of service or something that the group deems as valuable.
Yes.
Like doing your chores for your parents, and they're like, I'll give you $1 if you like do this thing. But you know they're actually going to do it, and everybody can can verify that. So we all can get a token of the value that we just did and exchange that in our network as a community. And it's not like a monetary thing, a fiat thing. And it kind of encourages us to keep, it's kind of like Reddit, but decentralized. Where Reddit, you get, what is it, karma for like participating.
Yeah.
You can kind of like change the rules to your game and know that this company Revel isn't, or Reddit isn't going to like shut you down because you got too much karma, right? Like there's rules to the game that we can't change.
Yeah.
Did
Exactly.
I sum that up right, Kelani?
Yeah, totally. And I think Peter's second example is so dope because it's also about like communities owning data and having that become an asset that they hold. So again, like Facebook is Facebook and it's worth so much because of our data, right? Why should we not be benefiting from that? Why is Facebook benefiting from that? And I think Peter's a really smart observation about the science right now, and how can communities take ownership of the data that they're providing about their own usage, their own behaviors, their own feelings. Yeah, it's a super interesting use case.
And there's a million other ones. Like,
Are there examples of like other communities not in weed that do things like that?
There's a lot. Yeah. I'd say one of the coolest ones is it's private in that like it's invite only, and it's a coin community DAO, whatever you want to call it, run by Terry Crews, the guy from White Chicks, the big buff black guy who makes his pec stamps. I don't know if you guys know him. And he started this community this coin called Power. And in there, he has artists of different types because he's like a patron. And he's invited his artists to participate in his network. And so they'll mint their NFTs, and then their DAO will have ownership of that. And then the value of that NFT can be determined speculatively in the marketplace. And then they can get loans, or they can use that NFT as collateral to get other sources of crypto. And then they can then refunnel that back into the community to sponsor more people to create art in different forms. And so that's one use case, and that's one community that is doing things like that.
Are there any from like the art realm that you've seen, Kelani?
Oh yeah, totally. Sorry. There's a lot that are around like collecting and amassing different kinds of resources. So NFT collection DAOs, that's kind of like the first sort of tangible in a way. I mean, it's all still just ephemeral and on the blockchain, but I think that there are some local organizations that are experimenting with this right now, but we haven't really seen them scale into, the kinds of gestures we're seeing with like collector DAOs. Creator DAOs are another one within the art context. So different artists who are banding together to kind of, either hold assets together, create pool resources, create works together, split those profits. It's reflective of how many artists in this space already work. So again, it's sort of just an enabling technology to formalize these kinds of things that have already been happening with experimental groups. Those are some of the biggest ones in the art world.
All right, this is my last application I want to throw out there. Is I met a gentleman who came from a family that has been producing, I think it's like producing lilies in Costa Rica for generations. And if you see a certain color with a certain type of pattern, they can tell you that's ours. Those are our genetics. We made that, and it's like licensed. And I don't completely know how that whole industry works, but they know exactly that pheno is theirs. I see a huge application in the cannabis world with, Peter was kind of getting to it. Like people want the credit for their strains, and like so many strains have been bastardized. You think about like Blue Dream has been just completely abused by people literally just making up that it's Blue Dream and just putting a new sticker on it. But to be able to say, hey, no, I made that in the 90s, back when it was illegal, the rest of you guys were like too scared to get in this game. And those are my genetics. Finding a way to create like an NFT that solidifies that pheno sounds super interesting to me, but I wouldn't know how you would, I couldn't quite conceptualize how you could take it from the real world to the blockchain. And I think that's kind of the conflict that's happening with like art, but I don't know. Is that even possible, Kelani?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's kind of the same kind of data that Peter was talking about, at least like from a human biology perspective. But I feel like healthcare is probably one of the next industries that we're going to see huge changes when it comes to how we control our own data and what access we have to our health data, our historical health information, projections about that, access to equitable care. I think there's a lot of opportunities in that space. And so when you talk about, DNA sequencing and different things like this, I think we are going to start to see a really high level of authenticity tracing around different kinds of biological processes. Definitely could happen.
I just wanted to say that that is happening 100%. And they're doing that because, like we said, it's an immutable ledger. But they're doing that in the hopes that when they go to file for a patent, that is considered prior art, and that will be, the patent office will view that as a rightful legal claim to those genetics and to those phenotypes. And so that question of whether the patent office around the world, the patent offices around the world will consider that prior art, or I forget the other term that they use for it, is still up in the air. But it is a route that a lot of people are taking to try and protect themselves once the rules do come out.
I mean, I guess my only question to some of these things is like, how do you establish the provenance of you as being the owner of it, right? Like, how is there any verification that's needed? Like, how do you put into the blockchain that like I, Lulu, created Blue Dream and this is my phenotype? I know, Kelani, you've run into some of these issues with people staking claim on some of your artists' work and claiming it for themselves. So what structures are in place that will allow like verification and provenance, which is what this whole, from what I understand, this whole system is about, establishing provenance. Like, but what is the first step? And I'm sorry, I probably jumped into a deeper theme at the closeout of this, but Kelani, is that what they're calling the oracles? There's like oracles that are trying to do things like this.
Yeah, and I think this is something where it's like really still conceptual, and it's like still searching for a use case that really takes off and really, functions well. To Golby's point, like actually serves a need in our lives. So I think it's still kind of playing out.
I think we should do a DAO, Jacoby and Peter.
Peter's got to manage it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about a members area, and I think a lot of this discussion today is definitely pushing me towards that direction of trying something different.
We have a Discord, and I could set up a token through Roll.
Do we have a Discord?
Yeah, it's populated with just stuff that I add on there for safekeeping, like different resources throughout that are just available online in cannabis. But we don't have adoption. We don't have adoption. So that's as any crypto project will tell you. That's the most important.
I think we should just do it. Just go through the motions and learn, right? Like right now is all learnings, new things, and that's what keeps us young.
Amen.
Oh, that's been my life motto. And the last weekend, Peter has seen it in full effect. My number one rule is like, ain't nothing to it, just to do it. So I'm 100% down to just try it, and then you iterate later. That's the techie in me, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
Mean.
So we're gonna wrap up. We're at the top of the hour. Kelani, you have so many things going on. Can you just give me like a little taste of what is coming up in the future for any of your upcoming projects?
Yeah, cool. Thanks. You can go to piecesofme.online. That's an online exhibition, piecesofme.online. And we have that show up. It's a show about NFTs. And we are evolving it from just a browser-based show into a physical exhibition. So that'll be coming up next. Really excited about that. Yeah, and other than that, I'm bringing some artists down here to San Miguel de Allende in Mexico for residencies this summer. So we're going to be sharing ideas, spending time together, writing, staring at the mountains, going to ride horses. Yeah.
Thank you, Kelani, so much for joining us.
Yeah.
I mean, this is my girl that speaks at Art Basel, Switzerland, as well as Miami. So super stoked to have you on our show. And next episode, we're bringing in another friend, Jessica Cohen from The Product Agent. In cannabis, we're very much limited to how we can advertise. But Jessica has been working in the film and TV world for about 20 plus years doing product placement. I think that is something that many brands are not thinking about. So we definitely want to bring her in to talk about the process for getting products online or onto film and TV as another way of, advertising to the mainstream and outside of our cannabis industry echo chamber. So we'll see you next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern.
At 7 p.m. Eastern.
7 p.m. Sorry.
Every week. But yeah, I'm excited for that one. Look, like our whole goal here is to create a dope, inclusive community, but to also put you guys on to ways that you can come up in the cannabis industry. And if this is another way that you can kind of finesse it to get product placement instead of trying to put a billboard up or something, like this is what it's all about, trying to find new ways for you guys to innovate and be prepared for the new markets opening up. Before we close out, I do want to just take a second to thank everybody that showed up to our meetup last weekend. We're at Central Park. It was hot as hell, so we appreciate you guys for joining us. We're doing another one next month in Bed-Stuy. Had to switch it up. Do or Die Bed-Stuy will be there. That will be April 24th. I'm sorry, April. That'll be July 24th. July's my birthday. I don't even know how I messed that up. But yeah, we'll send out information there. We hope to see you guys. Kelani, as always, it is such an honor to talk to you. You are the most brilliant artist nerd I've ever met in my entire life.
Facts.
Wow, thanks. This was really fun, y'all. I appreciate the conversation, and thanks for jumping in, Peter. It was really fun to have your inputs there.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure. I'm glad to get that side of myself out. But I also say check out Jam Young's performance on our IGTV. He killed it at our meetup. And so if you guys come through, you're going to maybe have some epic performances for you on July 24th in Bed-Stuy. For
sure. All right. Thank you to our audience and everybody that joined. As always, thank you to the people that rock with us on YouTube and the podcast, which is coming out soon. We appreciate you. Couldn't do it without you. And we will see you guys later. Peace.